Hello, everyone. Welcome to the SASSY Show with none other than yours truly, the Audacious one, Audacious Alexa. Today, we have a wonderful, very special guest here with us by the name of Dionna Roberson. It's really good to have you here. We had an interesting introduction, didn't we? I think we met through my boss, right? Was that how we?
Yeah. That was fun. I wasn't expecting, that outreach and all that stuff, but I'm really glad how it turned out.
Yeah, I'm glad that we got connected. I was just kind of curious to start things off and sort of break the ice. I've been talking a lot about SASS lately, and that's like, I guess it comes as no surprise, right? We're on the SASSY Show.
Sure.
But lately I've been feeling really sassy myself, and I don't know why. I don't know where it's coming from. But somehow I feel like it could be, maybe this is just because it's summertime, the hot girl summer thing, but
True.
something, it's like a change in the weather. My nose is tickling, and I'm trying to figure out like where it comes from. What makes you sassy?
That's a good question. I think that what makes me sassy is I am not afraid to tell everybody how great I think I am. I do not back down from, if I think that I'm good at certain things, I let people know. And that might come across as a little bit vain or conceited, and it probably is, but I really, that's something that I definitely never shy away from, and I think it makes me real sassy.
I like that. I wish that was what made me sassy.
Well, what makes you sassy?
That's the question to be asked and to be pondered upon, because I don't exactly know. I feel like there's a lot of speculative answers that I could spew out, but for the viewers' sake, I think one factor in what makes someone sassy is a mix between spontaneity and splendor. There's a magic to it, I guess. And I do believe we all have a unique sort of magic. It's more or less finding it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I find that to be the case with a lot of folks. Now, I don't know if that's what makes me sassy or not. Maybe the viewers can answer that question at the end of the
I'd love
show.
to hear. Yeah.
So trying to get a little bit of backstory, because I feel like I have seen, at least I know that on Instagram, we're connected on Instagram, obviously. A lot of the stuff that you speak about is really, aimed towards positivity, not just body positivity, but body hair and normalization of body hair, which is something that, it goes without saying that the fact that we're still talking about that, it says a lot about where we are, right?
Yeah, I think that's such a big aspect of who I am, whether I want it to be or not. I think it's such a polarizing topic, the idea of women or people who identify as women having body hair, and not being these hairless, idolized versions of what men want them to be. And so, yeah, I've just really lately in the past couple of years found the comfort in being who I want to be, and sharing my experience with other people.
And that I find so inspirational, and it's sort of what drew me, to your page and everything. I'm always checking out the low key, the highlights, because sometimes I need a little pick me up, where I'm feeling dysphoric or I'm feeling really shitty about just a comment someone made in passing, or, being misgendered, which, it's par for the course. But of course, to add insult to injury, there's always these weird standards that especially BIPOC folks, I think we get pigeonholed into, right? And so if you're not this, then you must be this, right? And yeah, adding layers on top of it, women, especially BIPOC women, they have the double or triple layer of there's the weird beauty standards that have been kind of cyclical, and they can, it's like the capitalist industry is trying to use that as a way to kind of browbeat women into socially policing each other. Therein, men see that as an opportunity to sort of vomit out all of their views, right, with the mix a little bit of misogyny. And then it's a way to kind of hit back a little bit at we could say, I mean, I do think there's a lot of body negativity out there, and not all of it is directed at cis women. There's a lot of body negativity towards queer people, men in general. You can't be short and fat and be a cute guy. You can't be a model if you're a short and a fat guy, right? So there's a lot of that too. And so some people, I think, latch on to that, and they're like, oh, this is an opportunity to browbeat someone because, oh, they didn't shave their armpits, or look at how hairy their legs are.
Yeah.
Not always is this the case, but I see it a lot today.
Yeah. I think that, like, I'm glad that you brought up people of color and stuff, because I was just talking about the standard that we're held to versus everybody else. And I think there's such a focus on trying to meet the expectations of what expectations are we trying to meet? Whose expectations are we trying to meet? And really changing the focus away from, the standard that you have to meet these certain expectations of what society has to say, and changing that to, what do I have to say? What's important to me, and what's important to my identity and my comfort. And that's really hard to do in a world that's so centered on white men, honestly. And so, you can get fetishized.
Oh, Foxy Brown is on Channel 11 tonight. We've both been dying to see that again.
Yeah, both of us. So earlier, when you said it was cool being married to me.
Super cool, babe.
I mean, how many black women have you been with before me?
Been with?
Mm-hmm.
You know about my other serious relationships.
Yes, your 2 white high school girlfriends, but I'm talking about casual dating, free love, and all that.
In the spirit of free love and all that, does it matter?
I'm just curious.
Oh, I'd have to think. I mean, because there was around 11, wait, maybe 0, 2. So hard to remember. I mean, do hugs count? Because I don't discriminate with hugs. You want one? Doesn't look like it. What was the question?
How many black...
No, okay, babe, come on. We've been married 15 years. What are we doing? Let's just watch Foxy Brown. Or Dan Rather. We both like Dan Rather, right?
And finally tonight, we explore Robert De Niro's unconventional taste in women.
You know what? Let's just read.
Outcast. There's like such extremes on the spectrum of being a person of color in general, and then being somebody who decides not to shave or looks different than what you come to expect from somebody like that. Yeah, and so it can be really scary sometimes to say that this aspect of who you want me to be is not who I am, and taking that step and really embracing that uncomfortable kind of like protest of just being yourself. Like I remember growing up, and I was just like this happy, like go lucky person. Like not a lot of things bothered me. I grew up with a really deep sense of self and self-worth, and I'm very grateful for that. But I was just as hairy as I am now then, and would get all these comments. And I'm a multiracial woman, but I do identify with being Black. But I have to acknowledge the fact that I have lighter skin. And so there's a lot of privilege that comes with that. And there's a lot of things that I can get away with because I have lighter skin. But I think what I said earlier, the idea that you know, our culture and our society is so absorbed with this idea of perfect like whiteness or perfect like straight, this heterosexual white man idea. It didn't matter that I had light skin because I was still considered, you know, too dark, too hairy, too dirty, especially wherever I had hair, it made me darker. And so I looked dirtier. Yeah, it's a scary thing, but to have your body literally be a protest of what everybody wants you to be.
Just like I think dating in high school and middle school is also a part of the white experience. It has to do with being, you know, the beauty standard. I think it's especially difficult though if you're a POC growing up in a predominantly white area, especially if you're a POC woman. Because not only are you combating racism, you're also combating fetishization, you're combating stereotypes, and you're combating sexism. Society's slowly changing stereotypes and beauty standards, but we're not there yet. And as always, women of color get the shorter end of the stick.
Yeah, I like how you brought up like the straight white male ideation, that everything sort of stratifies over that and then it kind of blows through the ether. If you're not anything near that, right? If you're not the 6 foot tall, blue-eyed, blonde hair or whatever ideal white dude, Chris Evans, I don't know. If you're not that, then you're just everything else. And so I agree. I know that very well. I mean, as a trans woman, I was once at one point a Black male. And so I know that even as a Black male, you're still measured against that standard, right?
Yeah.
And so I get part of that I understand that, you know, that, and especially with BIPOC folks with the light and the dark, I mean, we've got the stratification of colorism.
Today we're talking about a mode of discrimination that predominantly impacts people of color. And you might be surprised hearing this from me, but this episode's not about racism. I'm talking about colorism. First, let's be clear about what the word colorism actually means. Colorism is not synonymous with racism. It's a form of discrimination based on skin color. And before you're like, wait, isn't that like the literal definition of racism? Hold on to your social constructs because we're gonna knock a few down. And today we've got a special guest to help us with this demolition project. Hey Lee, let's break this one down.
Claro que sí. As a Latino of color, colorism is something I'm all too familiar with. Racism involves discrimination based on things such as skin color, but it's also dependent on power dynamics that become perpetuated by years of structural oppression. Black and Latino men getting longer sentences for the same crime as white men, racism. Black and Latino aunts telling you to date light-skinned men, colorism. Because we often conflate race with skin color, sometimes distinguishing between colorism and racism can get tricky, particularly in Latin American communities, where someone's heritage might include a combination of indigenous, Black, and white European ancestry. And let me give you a hint, it usually doesn't get better the darker you are. Unless you're Big Papi. Everyone loves that guy. The start of colorism we recognize in Latin America today likely began when the Spanish brought a European caste system to the Americas. Illustrations from Mexico in the 1700s depict classifications for individuals based on their gender, race, skin color, or place of birth. And while this era generated terms like mestizo meant to refer to mixed-race individuals, these hierarchies set the groundwork for associating whiteness with power and desirability. How does this influence Latinx culture today? Buckle up. First is privilege. In a lot of ways, lighter skin is still seen as better in Latinx communities, and can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Sociologist Margaret Hunter writes in her research, Mexican Americans with light skin earn more money, complete more years of education, live in more integrated neighborhoods, and have better mental health than do darker-skinned Mexican Americans. A 2012 study showed that employers viewed light-skinned Black and Latino job candidates as more intelligent than their darker counterparts. And for those of you who haven't figured this out yet, skin color doesn't determine intelligence. Go ask Bill Nye or Neil deGrasse Tyson, thank you. Prioritizing light skin tone also illustrates how colorism operates as a mechanism that encourages passing, particularly among Latinos. That's how you end up with the 2010 census, where almost 76% of Puerto Ricans identified as white, despite data estimating up to 46% of Puerto Ricans had significant African heritage. Puerto Ricans, who are we lying to? Which brings us to number 2, self-image. In Brazil, a model named Nayara Justino faced the impact of colorism head-on. In 2014, she entered a competition to become the reigning queen of the Globeleza Carnival, which is televised throughout Brazil. The title had always gone to a woman of Afro-Brazilian heritage, but Justino is Black and very dark-skinned, whereas previous winners were traditionally lighter-skinned. Despite that, she ended up winning the competition, only to have her title stripped away after the Brazilian public was up in arms because she was too Black to be the Carnival's queen. In this instance, the outrage over Justino's skin color came from both white and Black Brazilians. She was eventually replaced by Erica Mora, a lighter-skinned woman more in line with the color of previous winners. Colorism. It sucks. This is one way racism and colorism are different. Systems of oppression favor white people, meaning black people can't technically be racist towards other black people, but clearly in this case, they can and do perpetuate colorism in their own communities. The discrimination is coming from inside of the house. Example number 3, language. There's a pretty common phrase people in Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic grow up with, cafre. Among Spanish speakers in the Caribbean, the word means someone low class or brutish, and is said by people of all colors and racial backgrounds. The word implies you're acting darker in both complexion and behavior, but the word itself carries a linguistic and cultural connection to blackness. It shares roots with the South African racial slur, kafir. Should we have bleeped that? A colonial phrase that rose to prominence during apartheid and that's often compared to the N-word in the United States. While cafre might not carry the weight of an ethnic slur in Spanish, it's indicative of how colorism can quietly become a part of everyday life. So how do we begin to eradicate colorism from our communities? Let's get to work. It starts with some self-reflection. Sometimes our learned prejudices can take over like muscle memory. So first and foremost, ending colorism means unlearning what we've been told about what beauty and success should look like. So that goes for you, the I'm not black, I'm Dominican guy. You can be black and Dominican guy. But it also means breaking the steady stream of whiteness that still dominates Latin American media, politics, and culture. Trust me, I've been working in entertainment for a while and I've seen things. Perhaps most important, be conscious of elevating and uplifting voices that break our cultural expectations when it comes to colorism. And yes, have those tough conversations with family members, especially the ones encouraging a primita to date a lighter skinned guy. Grandma, tate quieta.
But a lot of the questions that I ask on the show, it's funny because watching your feed, a lot of these like Q&As, I see you basically answering them through your followers. You know, people, but like one of the things I like to ask people is, what biases do you feel influencers, particularly BIPOC influencers and queer influencers and femme influencers face at a higher rate? Well, again, these are things that there's a lot of it comes with the territory of putting yourself out there. And it's something that, you know, I've seen over time that you could argue for what it's worth, like our existence is a protest. And I do believe that. But I also feel like for me, just existing isn't enough. One of the themes that I always bring up is taking your seat at the table. And the reason being is because that table at one point was just all cis straight white men, right? And for the most part today, it still is. And that's why you take your seat at the table. If you're not invited, well, that sucks, because guess what? You didn't have to be invited, you know? And I think that's great what you're doing. To me, it's, you know, to illustrate it, that's a metaphor for what I see you doing. And I just want to say thank you for doing that.
Wow, no, thank you. I think it amazes me that you can build such deep community with people that you've never met. Like I've never met you in real life. This is our first real, you know, face-to-face through camera interaction that we've ever had. And yet there's a deep sense of community. And, you know, I've been lucky enough to find that on the internet. I've been lucky enough to have a family, whether they're related to me or not, with that community of people who, you know, are willing to make some rules and have dialogue and take those seats at the table and allow other people to come in too, and have those kind of conversations, even if they don't go so well. And, you know, you could see that on the poll that I had. There is some really great dialogue and there was some really not so great dialogue. But I think the goal isn't to have everyone agree with you or have everyone see things the way that you see things. But I think the goal is to at least see the humanity of everyone as a foundation and build from there. And if someone can see you as a person instead of just a body that should be sexualized or a body that has hair all over it, or, you know, you look one way, but you're saying you're this or whatever, if they can look past that and see that we're all just people and we all just are deserving of love and joy and all these things, like that's really where you can build from, and that's where you can grow and have other people understand where you're coming from. at least from my experience.
Absolutely. And how valid that is. I mean, visibility is one of the most crucial elements of this podcast, right? We want to get people as visible as possible and in the way that they want to be represented. One of the drawbacks of being an influencer or a sex worker or just a personality in general who's public is that you face the risk of scrutiny, obviously, but you also, along with that scrutiny, it could come ridicule, abuse, and then people taking your image, whatever you put out there, and purveying it in a way that's completely distorted, right? Because that's the risk that you take in putting yourself in that light. And so I recognize the tremendous risk that guests take to come on my show, with the trans woman, a Black trans woman who says too much and doesn't mean enough. Sometimes that's a part of it's a par for the course. But I was at a retreat about a week ago, and this is sort of like a hippie commune retreat. And this goes in line what you were talking about of the message, like the message that people get from seeing you, right? I had a moment with a friend he was a part of my commune camp at the festival. And I'll never forget when he told me that he looked up to me. And this is like a cis straight white male. Okay. He, him pronouns, tall, good looking. But he told me he looked up to me, and he had been looking up to me for years. And I never thought that way of him, in the way of like looking up to me. But I've known him for almost more than a decade, and he's younger than me. And it was interesting to hear that. And the reason he said he looked up to me is because how I walk in my truth.
Yeah.
And he said that he's still struggling with that himself, even so, right? And so I think that, again, it's like, you never know how you're going to touch someone and who you're going to touch.
Yeah. Especially when you feel like I'm not doing enough, or this isn't the end goal for me. I haven't reached my destination or whatever. To have people, see you and recognize the work that you put in is so special. Like I've had plenty of moments where I was like, this is a lot of work for what, and then have a paragraph in my DMs about how much, me posting about something that I didn't even think about sometimes, how it impacted someone. And so I know that feeling well. And I think they always come, at least for me, they always come when I'm like, all right, I'm done posting, or I'm done talking about this. It's just that little reassurance that just like drives you much farther than you thought that you could go. Yeah,
I think that sometimes it, as much as the mantra of a lot of these self-help gurus and, self-empowerment and actualization, they always talk about at the top of the pyramid, beneath the love, food, shelter, health, is finding a way to be content intrinsically. Right. But the relationship is symbiotic between the external validation and the intrinsic validation. And this is something that I think over time, I'm sure that we're going to start to see, like psychologists, psychiatrists, and self-help enhancement folks, that conversation will start to change. But there is an intrinsic relationship between the two, of the intrinsic and the external, of getting that validation. It's true that ultimately you need to be able to validate yourself, right? To be able to validate others even, or, affirm yourself. But that is, to me, I see it as a cycle. And so, a nice example, I'm getting facial feminization surgery in August. I hear from a lot of folks of their friends and family, they're like, well, we're happy for you. It's going to be very painful. It's going to change your image, and it's permanent, and you better get and these are all correct. All of the concerns are substantiated well throughout history of other trans people undergoing the knife. However, that being said, like, these are unique to my situation. And ultimately, the decision isn't something that I made just based on intrinsically, I need to look like a cis Black woman because life will be a little less violent for me. There's many factors. And so it's not just through the external, but a lot of folks that I talk to, they're like, oh, you're just doing it for other people. You're just doing it for this reason. And people assume that they know why you're doing something or why you're walking in your truth. Like in like manner, I'm sure you get from many cis men especially, and probably cis women too. Oh, your hairy armpits, I bet you're doing it for attention. Or, oh, I'm not going to repeat all the different comments, but it's that's what is so interesting. And it's like, it's okay to be validated by each other externally, while at the same time intrinsically taking care of yourself. Both of those are okay.
Yeah, I think that the dynamic, I like that you said there's a cycle of, like I give and I receive, and I from within get my confidence, but also other people are feeding me. There's such a relationship between each other that's so important, because I think about us like as animals. I don't feel like humans are any different than any other creature on earth, and it's just so important to have that sense of community and oneness, because then it's like you get fed and I get fed, and it's just this cycle of constant feeding, and no one's starving anymore, because it's this constant reassurance that you're okay and we love you, and I love myself, and so I can love you better, and I'm myself, and so I can help you. And it's just this constant like cycle, a symbiotic relationship of I feed and you feed, and it's beautiful.
While we all sit at the same table, right?
Yeah, I definitely used to be that person that didn't want that attention. I didn't want anybody to know me, or I didn't want to have an impact. I just wanted to be me, and I wanted to stay in my little box and be fine with that. And then there came a point where I realized that that wasn't enough. Like, and I think what you said earlier, like, sure, our bodies in themselves are these protests, but there comes a point where you need to do more. You're not doing enough. And I think like there's like a point where I was like, all right, I guess I can't just be in the corner forever. And I think sometimes you get, thrusted into the spotlight. Sometimes you walk into it yourself. And however you end up there, I think I realized that why I wanted to be in the corner is because, like, I don't know, I just thought somebody else would, change the world. Somebody else would help other people be themselves. Somebody else, this, that, and the third. In reality, it's us as individuals loving ourselves and loving other people that's really going to change the world. And so if I'm not doing my part, I can't, expect other people to be doing theirs. And in reality, nothing's going to get done if individuals aren't doing their own parts and stuff. And so I would love to go back in that box. Honestly, I'd love to go back in the corner. But like you said, there comes a point where there's no going back. Once you're known, you're not unknown. And so what were you known for, I think is the important thing.
Definitely. I mean, it's a very difficult dance, and walking that balance, taking the risk of the message getting lost or misconstrued, or, once it comes out of the ether, it could be a completely different message. I worry about that a lot. I probably worry about it a little too much, but it does ever so often slip into my brain about like, okay, I'm putting out all this content, I'm getting these subscriptions, but are these the kind of people that I would want money from? And looking at my body or looking at my face, and it's hard. It's very hard, and it's something that it's difficult, I think, for a lot of folks to understand that don't occupy any of those spaces, to put out content without thinking about how gross the people are on the other end of the keyboard that are tapping to it. I'm not even kidding you. And it used to not be this way as much before I transitioned. I will say transitioning, I really got weird sense of it because of all the weird messages I started to get from men.
Yeah. Those
But
DMs
yeah.
are a scary, lawless place.
Seriously, though,
Yeah.
seriously. And I think that just kind of changed the game. You know, that really did change the game. I'm not saying that I didn't have some reluctance to put myself out there beforehand because of the abuse that I experienced. And there's always going to be a pushback. And again, it's par for the course. You have to really evaluate what you can and can't handle. And it's okay to step away too. I know plenty of influencers that have been like, this is enough for me. I'm taking a hiatus. And sometimes that can be a good thing. So kind of veering into the direction of us, you know, we've talked a lot about our viewers and how we're influencing other people throughout the way we present ourselves. But I feel like it's important to reflect upon what we've gone through to get where we're at, and also how we can be kinder to one another and supporting each other, which, by the way, sometimes we don't always have all the spoons to do so. I think acknowledging that's important. What do you feel are some ways that we can support one another?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different levels, starting at like what we've been talking about this whole time. There's social media, there's, you know, commenting, there's posting about each other, there's, you know, uplifting one another in this public setting. But sometimes I can forget that, like, or I can see you as your Instagram profile instead of you as a person. And I think one way to really like uplift people who are in this like public eye in some capacity is like, all right, let's check in as, you know, individuals, as people. Like, how are you? Let's take a step back from sometimes what we're trying to accomplish, you know, and just, how are you doing? Like, how's your personal life? How's, you know, and that's an aspect of our personal lives. But sometimes what can be helpful in those scenarios is like not talking about those scenarios all the time and creating a space where people can be other parts of themselves. Like, I'm a hairy person, that's a part of me, but there are so many other parts of me, and allowing that a space where people can be those other parts of themselves, if that makes sense.
I wholeheartedly agree. And I think it's wonderful you brought up that point, because I think that's the mistake that a lot, or the trap that many people fall into, especially even other BIPOC folks, is like, you know, which movement should be supported first, or, and it's great that we're well aware that, you know, there's all these social ills and problems are not going to go anywhere. But it's important that we have a space to where, you know, there could be other aspects besides our, you know, like identity politics or the optics of things. And so, yeah. And I mean, there's so many different aspects to you as a person, which is the main reason why I wanted you as a guest on my show, not for body hair, but because of the fact that, I mean, you have so many different things going for you. And to speak of that, I was just curious, were there any hidden talents or non-talents that you would like to share with us on the SASSY show?
Hidden talent, well, hidden to you maybe. I think it's pretty common knowledge from my Instagram that I love art and I love creating, and that's such a big part of my life. And but I try not to post about it too much because I don't know, it's an intimate aspect of who I am. But I blow glass, and I think that's another thing that makes me really sassy. I really like fire.
The furnace is the place that houses all of the molten glass. It's at 2,150 degrees. The color is glass granulars that we roll the molten glass through. The glory hole is the reheating chamber, and that glory hole is at 2,000 degrees. The marver is a piece of mild steel that we use to selectively cool and shape the molten glass.
And so working with that fire, creating all these things. And so it's something that my friends know, but it's not so much in the public eye as much as it probably will be in the future. And that's something that I'm really proud of, and something that I think I'm hoping to embrace a little bit more, is that creativity. Because I used to think that being creative like wasn't a good thing. I don't know why. I think there's just such this stigma of, if you're not going anywhere when you're creating, and yet creation has driven everything that we are. And that took a really long time for me to come to terms with. But yeah, that's a little bit something that has nothing to do with how I look or act, or it's just something that, fire really excites me.
But I feel like I did find your glass blowing page. I feel like I did. Do you have an Instagram?
I do. I hit it though. So
I found it though. I found it. See, that's how good,
we'll really be digging.
People underestimate the amount of research, the depth that Alexa goes to find you. And okay. I definitely took my time with it. And I was like, yeah, maybe we could talk a little bit about that. And I'm glad you brought that up about there being more to you, because all of my guests, like I said, this is just a multifaceted platform, and I want you to have the podium. That being said, regretfully, this is the closing of this episode of the SASSY Show. But that doesn't mean that you won't see less of Dionna, of course, right? I know that's not going to be the case for me, and hopefully that won't be the case for you, the viewer. So I was just curious, were there any pages that you would like the audience to check out, like for your art, or is that something more private?
I'm trying to just incorporate that into the Instagram that I have. It's just Dionna._, couple underscores. And so, yeah, I think if you're interested in what I do, then I think that's the best page to find. I'm kind of bitter that you found the other one, and I'll hide that one.
You know what? You can run, but you can't hide from Audacious. You can run, but you can't hide from the Audacity. That's just...
Somebody once told me that having an art account is a very telling thing about your personality. And I was like, no. So then I closed it, but it's too late. It's too late.
Well, don't feel bad, because Alexa also has an art account. My art account is actually the one and only Alexa, and it's also hidden. It's a backup to my main Instagram. And I have a lot of Instagram live videos in the earlier, more nascent parts of the podcast that were recorded there. Secret Instagram, but not so secret now.
All right.
So anyways, thank you again for coming on the SASSY Show. It is such a pleasure, and I am beyond grateful to have you here with me and share this platform.
Thank you so much.
And for you, the viewer, you heard what she said. You know where to check her out. Even if that page is maybe under a different name at some point in the future, there's going to be links posted for her Instagram page. As far as you're concerned, though, as the viewer, I want you to do one thing when you get home or when this podcast ends. Take care of yourself. Alexa, out.